He had lived alone for 8 years, speaking only to his horses and the wind. But when 10 Apache women appeared at his gate that stormy night, begging for shelter, Tobias Redmont would face the hardest choice of his life, because the men hunting them were already close enough to smell the smoke from his chimney. The rain hammered against the wooden shutters like bullets, each drop a reminder of why decent folk stayed indoors when nature turned violent. Tobias sat by his fireplace, mending a bridle that had seen better days when the knocking started, not the polite tap of a neighbor. This was desperate, urgent, the sound of people who had nowhere else to go. He froze, leather still in his hands. Nobody came to his ranch, not anymore. Not since he'd made it clear that Tobias Redmont wanted nothing to do with the world beyond his fence line. The knocking came again, harder this time, accompanied by voices speaking in a language he recognized but hadn't heard in years. Apache, his blue, odd turned cold. The last time he'd heard that tongue, his wife and daughter were still breathing. The last time strangers had come to his door in the night. He'd buried everything he loved in the morning. His hand moved instinctively to the rifle, mounted above the mantel. Muscle memory from nights when sleep came with one eye open. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the tone of the voices, not war cries or demands, but something that sounded almost like pleading. Maybe it was the way the wind carried their words, broken and desperate. Or maybe it was the realization that warriors didn't usually announce themselves by knocking. He approached the heavy oak door, each step measured and careful. Through the thick wood, he could hear them more clearly now. Women's voices, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. One voice rose above the others, speaking English with an accent that made each word sound like it had been carved from stone. "Please, we know you are there. We need shelter just for tonight." Tobias pressed his palm against the door, feeling the vibration of their voices through the wood. 8 years of solitude had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, every instinct screamed danger. Not from the women themselves, but from whatever had driven them to his door in the middle of a storm that could kill a man in minutes. He thought of Sarah, how she used to scold him for his suspicion of strangers, how she'd say that kindness was the only thing that separated them from the animals. But Sarah was dead, and kindness had died with her on a morning when he'd trusted the wrong people. The voice came again, closer to the door now, as if the speaker had pressed her face against the wood. "They are coming. If you do not help us, we will die out here, and when they find our bodies at your gate, you will die too." Tobias's hand hovered over the iron bar that secured his door. In 8 years, he had never removed it for anyone. But something in that voice, a certainty that jest and had made his stomach drop, told him that tonight everything was about to change. Because somewhere in the darkness beyond his ranch, riders were closing in. And once they arrived, there would be no going back to the life he'd built in the shadows. The iron bar felt heavier than it should have. When Tobias finally lifted it from its brackets, 8 years of rust and fear seemed to fight against his decision. But the Deg Haza grew through her black hair and eyes that had seen too much death. But it was the woman who had spoken through the door that commanded his attention. She stood slightly apart from the others, her chin raised despite the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. Blood trickled from a cut above her left eye, and her dress was torn at the shoulder, but her gaze held his without flinching. "I am Ayana," she said, her English careful but clear. "These are my sisters, my daughters, my people. When your other people in it." For 8 years, it had been his fortress, his refuge from a world that had taken everything. Now, it seemed to shrink around these women who brought with them the smell of rain and fear and something else. The metallic scent of blood that wasn't entirely their own. Ayana was the last to enter, and as she passed him, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "The soldiers who hunt us, they are not far behind. Maybe an hour, maybe less. They will not stop until every live when they expected us to accept death. Because some of us fought back when they burned our village and killed our men." The baby in the young woman's arms made a weak sound, and Ayana's jaw tightened. "And because one of their officers will not see morning if we live to tell what he did to my youngest sister." Tobias felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd known soldiers like that. Men who wore uniforms but had forgotten what honor meant. Men who took what they wanted and killed, especially when they thought their prey was trapped. He turned back to the women who were clustered near his fireplace, some tending to wounds while others comforted the youngest among them. They looked like survivors, not warriors, but he'd learned long ago that survival sometimes required a man to become something he'd never planned to be. "There is a cellar beneath the kitchen," he said to Ayanna. "Stone walls, hidden entrance. It might hold all of you, but it'll be cramped." She's eyes, surprise, recognition, maybe even hope. Outside, the storm was beginning to weaken, and with it, the cover that had protected them this far because, in the distance, barely audible over the dying wind, came the sound of horses moving through mud and the low voices of men who thought they had their prey cornered. The sound of approaching horses cut through the storm like a death sentence. Tobias moved with the efficiency of a man who had survived by thinking 3 steps with the practiced ease of people who had fought before. "You are not helpless," Tobias said, understanding flooding through. "Rough him." "We never were," Ayanna replied, her voice carrying a hardness that matched the steel in her grip. "But sometimes it is better to let men think what they wish to think. Captain Morrison believes he is hunting frightened women who will cower and beg. He is about to learn otherwise." The youngest woman with the baby moved toward the back of the house. Without being, voices grew clearer. Men calling to each other through the rain, coordinating their approach. Tobias could make out at least 6 distinct voices, maybe more. Professional soldiers, but operating in territory they didn't understand. Hunting prey they had completely misjudged. "The cellar," Tobias said again, but Ayanna shook her head. "We run now, and they follow us forever. We hide, and they search until they find us. But if we end this here tonight, the hunting stops." Tobias felt some'll find us, but when his men see a white rancher fighting alongside Apache, they will hesitate. That hesitation will cost them everything. A horse nickered close to the house and heavy boots splashed through the mud outside. Someone was moving around the building, checking for exits, planning their assault. In minutes, they would be inside, expecting to find cowering victims. Tobias checked his rifle, ensuring a round was chambered. Sarah's voice whispered in his memory, reminding him that was how it was supposed to be. Maybe some men weren't meant to hide from the world forever. Outside, a voice rang through the storm, commanding, arrogant, certain of victory. "I know you're in there. Come out now, and we'll make this quick." Captain Morrison had arrived, and he was about to discover that some hunts end with the hunter becoming the prey. Tobias positioned himself at the front window, while Ayanna and 3 other women spread throughout the main room, invisible in the shang and the darkness. Soldiers spreading out around his house, taking positions that would prevent escape. Standard military tactics, but they were operating under other false assumptions. They thought they were surrounding a cabin full of frightened women and maybe one sympathetic rancher. Ayanna appeared beside him, moving so silently he didn't hear her approach. "The one by the barn," she whispered. "He is Sergeant Blake. He was there when they killed my husband, the one near your well. That is CST. His men will come through the back and sides, but they expect to find women too frightened to fight, and a rancher too scared to resist." She handed him something, a small mirror, polished to shine. "When you see the signal, take Morrison. We will handle the rest." Tobias was about to ask what signal when a new voice cut through the storm. Young, uncertain, nothing like the harsh commands they'd been hearing. "Captain, sir, maybe we should just search the place and move on." Could be just so. Men who had already decided to kill everyone inside or trust these Apache women who had turned his sanctuary into a battlefield? Tell me in the comments. I need to know which side you choose. Because what Tobias decided next would determine whether justice or murder ruled this night. He made his choice. The front door exploded inward as Morrison kicked it open, his rifle raised and ready. But instead of finding cowering women, he found himself staring down the barrel of Tobias's winch's patchy steel. Morrison's eyes widened as he understood he'd walked into a trap, but understanding came too late. Tobias's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, Ayana appeared behind the captain like a shadow given form. "This is for my sister," she whispered in Morrison's ear, her blade sliding between his ribs with surgical precision. Morrison dropped his rifle, his hands clutching at the wound. But Ayana wasn't finished. She wanted him to see her face, to nose in riders, maybe more. Morrison had been the advanced party, not the main force. The real army was just arriving. Ayana pulled her blade free from Morrison's chest, her face grim as she processed what they were hearing. Around the house, her women appeared from the shadows like ghosts, each confirming what Tobias already knew. Morrison's original squad was dead, but their victory had lasted exactly 30 seconds. "How many?" Ayana asked the woman who materialized beside her. 15, Rider Anna shook her head. "We cannot run from this many. They will hunt us across 3 territories." "We're not running," Tobias replied, moving toward a cabinet he hadn't opened in 8 years. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were things he'd hoped never to touch again. Dynamite, fuses, the tools of a man who'd once demolished mountainsides to build railroads, and later other things when the war had required it. "My ranch sits on a hill," he explained, his hands working automatically to prepare. "The been his prison for 8 years. Then, at Morrison's body cooling on his floor. Home wasn't a place anymore, it was a choice, and his choice was to make sure these women lived to see morning. Some things matter more than property," he said, echoing words Sarah used to speak when he'd gotten too attached to material things. Outside, the voices were getting closer, orders being shouted, positions being taken. Someone had found Morrison's body by now, seen the blood, understood that they're easy tile, and picked up the prepared charges. "Lady, I've been a dead man for 8 years. Tonight, I'm choosing to live again." But as they prepared to leave through the back entrance, a new sound stopped them cold. The cry of a baby. Not the one in their arms, but another somewhere out in the storm. One of the soldiers had brought a child with him. Because sometimes the worst monsters hide behind the most innocent shields, and the hardest choices are the ones that test how far a man will go. Ray shook his head. He'd heard too many real cries in his life to mistake the genuine terror in that small voice. Someone out there, probably one of Morrison's men, had brought their own child on what they'd expected to be a simple murder mission. Now that child was about to pay for their father's sins. "We can't blow the dam," he said quietly. "Not with a baby down there." "Then we all die," one of the other women hissed. "My daughter's life matters as much as that one." She was right. "And Tobia hat baby. That leaves us outnumbered 3-1. In a fair fight, yes, but this won't be fair." Tobias moved to another cabinet, this one containing items that spoke to a different kind of warfare. Cal rips, iron spikes designed to horses, tripwires that could break a man's neck in the dark, bear traps that had never seen a bear but had tasted human flesh during the war. 8 years ago, I turned this place into a fortress because I was afraid of dying. Tonight, we're going to use those. Other half will stay back to secure the retreat route. And then, Tobias smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Then we show them the difference between hunting frightened women and fighting people who've got nothing left to lose. The plan was simple, brutal, and completely insane. Ayana and 4 women would create a distraction at the front of the house, making enough noise to draw the assault team. Meanwhile, Tobias and the remaining women would circle around through Terra Scribe to the channel. The baby's cry came again, weaker now, and Tobias felt time slipping away like water through his fingers. Every second they delayed was another second closer to a child's death. Another moment that would haunt him if he survived this night. "Move," he whispered. As Ayana and her team took positions at the front of the house, Tobias led the others into the storm through his back door. The rain was lighter now, but the ground was treacherous, and one mistake crept closer through the mud and darkness, He could make out the shape of a military supply cart, and beside it, a woman hunched over something small and moving, not a soldier's wife. This woman wore the rough clothes of a camp follower, probably a lairess or cook who'd been forced to bring her child on what should have been a simple mission. Tobias signaled for the Apache women with him to hold position while he moved closer. Through the rain, he could hear the woman's desperate whispers bed. He made his decision. Rising from cover, Tobias walked directly toward the wagon. His rifle held low, but ready. The nearest guard spotted him immediately raising his weapon, but Tobias called out in a voice that carried calm authority. "Easy, soldier. Lieutenant Morrison sent me to secure the civilians." The lie bought him precious seconds. In the darkness and chaos, wearing his dark coat, he could pass for military at a distance. By the time the guard realized his mistake, Tobias was weighed on. She whispered, "Don't hurt my baby. She's done nothing wrong." "Neither have you," Tobias said quietly. "What's your name?" "Mary. Mary Hendricks. I cook for the men. Do their washing. Captain Morrison said it would be safe. Said we were just going to arrest some women who'd stolen horses." Tobias featsed. He anger burned in his chest. Morrison had lied to his own people, turned a cook and her baby into unwitting accessories to murder, even dead. The man was still destroying lives. M spotted him. One shouted a warning while the other raised his rifle. But the Apache women Tobias had left in position were already moving, emerging from the darkness like vengeful spirits. The fight was brief and decisive. These soldiers had expected to face frightened refugees, not experienced warriors who'd been planning their revenge for days. Within minutes, the supply area was secure, and Mary Hendricks was running into the night with her baby, disappearing into the safety of the real leader after all. Somewhere in the darkness, a much more dangerous enemy had been watching, waiting, letting others do the dying while he positioned his forces for the killing blow. Colonel Bradley's voice carried the confidence of a man who held all the cards. Through the darkness, Tobias could see torches spreading out in a wide circle around his property. Not the dozen riders they'd originally faced, but what looked like a full military operation. Morrison had been the bait. "There are no terms," Ayanna shouted back. "Only justice. Your men destroyed our village, murdered our families, and worse. Now you will answer for their crimes." Tobias made his way back toward the house, moving carefully through terrain that was now a maze of soldiers and positioned weapons. As he got closer, he could see the situation more clearly. Ayanna's group had indeed won their fight, but at a cost. Two of the Apache women lay still in the mud. Their sacrifice buying the others a chance attacked the front. Instead, he delivered himself to us. The young lieutenant tried to speak, but Ayanna's blade pressed closer to his skin, drawing a thin line of blood. "How old are you?" Tobias asked the boy. 19, came the whispered reply. "Same age as the cook's daughter who just ran into the night because your father turned her into a target. Same age as some of the women your captain murdered." Tobias moved closer, studying the boy's face. "Tell me, Lieutenant Bradley, did you know?" And also, he reflected, more desperate now. "I have 60 men surrounding this house. Release my son, and I'll give you safe passage to the territorial border." Tobias almost laughed. Safe passage from a man who'd built his career on broken promises and manufactured wars. But as he looked at the young lieutenant, he saw something that gave him pause. Genuine shock and growing horror as the boy began to understand what he'd been part of. "There's another way," Tobias said to Ayanna. "One that doesn't require his dace what that truth means." Before anyone could respond, a new sound cut through the night. Horses approaching at full gallop, and with them, voices shouting orders that didn't come from Bradley's men. Someone else was arriving. Someone with enough authority to make a full colonel nervous. Through the broken door, Tobias could see new torches, these carried by riders' wes, airing different uniforms. Federal marshals, maybe, or territorial investigators. Someone had been watching Bradley feared. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe to the channel. Dawn broke over Tobias Redmont's ranch 6 hours later. painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that seemed appropriate for a night that had ended one kind of war and started another. The federal investigators had listened to Lieutenant Bradley's testimony with growing horror, documenting crimes that reached far beyond Morrison's unit and implicated officials all the way to the territorial capital. Colonel Bradley was Ribble. "Where will you go?" he asked Ayanna. "North to relatives who escaped Bradley's campaign. We will rebuild, but not here. This place holds too much blood now." She paused, studying his face. "What about you? Your home is destroyed. Your solitude ended. The man who lived alone for 8 years died tonight." Tobias nodded. She was right. The hermit who'd hidden from the world was gone, replaced by someone who'd remembered that some things were worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth fighting from safe. The women rode north toward hope, and Tobias prepared to ride west toward redemption. The sun climbed higher over a ranch that had seen too much death and just enough justice. Sometimes the end of one story was simply the beginning of another, and sometimes a man who thought he was finished with living discovered he was just getting started. Years later, travelers would tell stories of the night 10 Apache women and one lonely rancher stood against an army and won.